The man in the corner table. The warm golden lights of the Gilded Fig, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, spilled out through tall, arched windows onto the cobblestone sidewalk outside. Inside, crystal chandeliers shimmered over fine linen-draped tables, and couples clinked glasses of wine, laughter mingling with the gentle notes of live piano music. This was the kind of place where corporate moguls shook hands over $100 steaks, where celebrities made appearances to be seen, where the glittering image of perfection reigned supreme. And yet, in the farthest corner of the restaurant, a man sat quietly, nearly invisible among the extravagance. Wearing a simple black t-shirt, faded jeans, and scuffed boots, he didn't look like he belonged. His hair was tied back in a modest ponytail, and a short beard framed a calm, thoughtful face. There were faint lines under his eyes, not from age, but from life. Years of stories and pain quietly written into his skin. He didn't make a fuss. He didn't call for attention. In fact, he had been sitting at the same table for over 20 minutes, patiently sipping water. That man was Keanu Reeves. But no one recognized him. Not tonight. Not in this place. Across the room, a waiter named Dylan frowned as he caught sight of the man again. Dylan was young, well-groomed, and deeply ambitious. He had worked hard to land a position at the Gilded Fig, believing it would open doors to a brighter future, connections, influence, and maybe even wealth. The idea of waiting on someone like Keanu Reeves should have excited him, inspired him. But he didn't see Keanu Reeves. He saw a man who looked out of place. With a quick glance at the hostess, Dylan muttered under his breath, "Who let that guy in?" The hostess, a kind young woman named Alina, shrugged. He walked in earlier, alone, seemed polite, sat himself. Dylan scoffed, "We're not a fast food joint. We don't let walk-ins wearing sneakers and thrift store shirts sit in our VIP corner." Alina frowned, sensing his attitude. He wasn't bothering anyone. I figured he might be waiting for someone. Dylan rolled his eyes, straightened his black vest, and strode toward the table in a corner, his irritation masked by a stiff smile. "Sir," he began, voice tight and clipped, "I'm afraid this table is reserved for high-profile guests. I'll have to ask you to move." Keanu looked up, eyes soft and unthreatening. He smiled gently. "Oh, I see. I didn't realize." "There's a sign," Dylan replied shortly, nodding to a small card nearby, half hidden behind a vase of white roses. "It's quite clear." Keanu glanced at it, then back at Dylan. "My mistake. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." His humility took the waiter off guard for a split second, but only a second. "Well, we can seat you at the bar," Dylan said, glancing at the man's plain outfit. "Or perhaps there's a diner down the block that might be more your style." There was no malice in Keanu's expression, only quiet surprise. "Is that so?" Dylan nodded. "This is a place for—" But before he could finish, a small voice interrupted him. "Excuse me, mister," said a little girl, no older than 7. Dylan turned, annoyed, to see a frazzled single mother struggling with her 2 young children at a nearby table. The little girl had wandered up to Keanu's table with wide, curious eyes. "You're the man from Toy Story 4, right?" she asked shyly. "Duke Kaboom." Dylan blinked. The room went still for a moment. Keanu smiled warmly. "You have a good memory." "Yes, I played Duke Kaboom." The little girl beamed. "I love that movie. My brother and me watch it all the time." Her brother peeked around his mother's arm and gave a small wave. Keanu looked over at the mother, who seemed mortified. "I'm so sorry. She loves movies, and I—" Keanu stood slowly and walked over, kneeling gently to the child's level. "Thank you for watching," he said sincerely. "That means a lot to me." Then, to the mother, "Would it be all right if I bought dinner for you and your kids tonight?" The woman's eyes welled up. "I couldn't. We don't want to impose." "You're not imposing," Keanu said gently. "It would be my honor." The mother nodded, lips trembling. unable to speak. Dylan stood frozen, mouth slightly open. And in that moment, something began to shift in the room. Other guests had begun to notice the exchange. A few whispered. One man pulled out his phone and subtly took a photo. The pianist, who had been glancing over curiously, began to play a soft tune more tender than before. Alina approached from the front desk, eyes wide with realization. She had pulled up Keanu's name in a quick search, and everything clicked. The modest man, the familiar face, the voice, the kindness. "You're Keanu Reeves," she breathed. Keanu looked at her, a little bashfully. "Yes." Dylan took a step back. I didn't realize, I thought." Keanu held up a hand, cutting off the apology with grace. "It's all right. Really." But it wasn't all right. Not entirely. Because what no one knew yet, not Dylan, not the guests, not even Alina, was that Keanu wasn't just here to eat. He was here for something much bigger. Something that would change everything. A hidden truth behind the apron. The elegant atmosphere of the Gilded Fig had changed. Where once there had been hushed murmurs about wine pairings and overpriced entrees, now the whispers carried a different kind of electricity, one laced with awe and curiosity. The man who had sat quietly in the corner, wearing clothes too casual for the velvet-lined booths and crystal chandeliers, was none other than Keanu Reeves. But Keanu hadn't come to bask in attention. That was never his way. He had simply come to observe. Still kneeling beside the single mother's table, Keanu whispered something kind and sincere to the little girl, then stood and placed a reassuring hand on the mother's shoulder. "Please enjoy your meal. I'll take care of everything." The mother stammered a soft thank you, blinking back tears. As he turned to walk back toward the bar, Dylan, the waiter who had only minutes ago tried to dismiss him, followed behind like a shadow caught in guilt. "Mr. Reeves," Dylan called, voice cracking slightly. I had no idea. Please forgive me. I wasn't trying to be rude." Keanu stopped and faced him. "But you were." The words weren't harsh. They were spoken softly, but they hit like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through Dylan's pride. "I judged you," Dylan admitted, eyes lowered. "I just thought. I don't know. You didn't look like the people we usually serve." Keanu's face remained calm. "You're right. I don't." He paused for a long moment. "Do you think kindness should only be offered to people who look like they can afford to dine here?" "No, of course not," Dylan said quickly, flustered. "Because that's how it felt," Keanu said gently, yet firmly. "And not just to me." He glanced toward the mother and her children again. "You might not know their story, but I do." Dylan blinked, confused. "You know them?" Keanu nodded slowly. "I've known her since we were kids. That woman over there. She was my neighbor when I was 10. Her mother used to make us banana pancakes on Saturdays. She was like family to me. I hadn't seen her in years, until today. And now she's here with 2 kids, trying to give them a special night even though she's struggling." Dylan's mouth opened slightly. He turned toward the family with new eyes, suddenly aware of the worry behind the mother's smile, the patched knees on her son's jeans, the gentle way she had pushed a half-eaten plate toward her daughter. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Keanu said, not unkindly. There was silence between them. Then Keanu added, "But I'm not here to shame you. I'm here for something more important." At that moment, Alina, the hostess, returned to the conversation with a mixture of awe and uncertainty in her face. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "would you like a private room? We can make arrangements." Keanu smiled. "No need. I'm quite comfortable where I am." He turned to Dylan again. "Is the head manager here tonight?" Dylan stiffened. Yes. Mr. Carlyle is upstairs. He usually doesn't like to be disturbed. I think he'll want to make an exception." Alina looked puzzled, but Keanu offered no further explanation. Instead, he walked calmly past the bar, his boots gently tapping on the marble floor. He stopped at the host podium and picked up a small, leather-bound reservation book. It looked old, well used. Keanu flipped through the pages with ease, as if he'd done it hundreds of times before. "Sir, what are you doing?" Dylan asked. Keanu glanced up. "Just checking something." He turned the book toward Dylan, showing a list of names written in ink. "See this reservation for Reeves, key, 7:30 p.m., private lounge." Dylan paled. That was you. I made the reservation 3 days ago." "But why would you sit at that corner table instead?" Keanu's eyes softened. "Because I wanted to see this place as it really is, not from the private lounges or the red carpet treatment, but as a regular man, as someone who served, not just someone who served too." There was something deeper in his voice now, a note of history, of experience. Dylan didn't yet know it, but the Gilded Fig wasn't just another fine dining spot on Keanu's bucket list. It used to be his mother's dream. Flashback, 1982, Toronto. A tiny apartment on the edge of downtown Toronto buzzed with life. Inside, a young Keanu, barely 18, sat at the kitchen table, peeling potatoes. Across from him, his mother, Patricia, moved around the kitchen with an apron covered in flour and a sparkle in her eye. "One day," she said, as she kneaded dough for fresh bread, "I'm going to open my own place." Keanu smiled. "You should. Your food's better than half the diners around here." She laughed. "Not a diner, baby. A real restaurant. One with candles and music and beautiful lighting. But not just for rich people. A place where people feel like they matter, even if all they can afford is soup and bread." Keanu watched her dream out loud as the aroma of home-cooked food wrapped around them like a hug. Years later, when Keanu began finding success in Hollywood, he never forgot that kitchen, or that dream. When his mother passed away unexpectedly in her early 60s, her dream had gone unrealized. Until Keanu made a vow. He would build that place, in her name, in her honor. And he did. Quietly, without fanfare. The Gilded Fig wasn't just another fancy restaurant for him. It was the living heartbeat of his mother's memory. A place that stood for dignity, not status. Warmth, not wealth. He had opened it with the help of a small group of local chefs and silent partners, never attaching his name publicly. The only sign of his presence was a small brass fig tree engraved into the corner of each menu, a symbol from one of his mother's old paintings. Most of the staff didn't even know who the real owner was. Only the general manager, Mr. Carlyle, knew the truth. And that was how Keanu wanted it. Until tonight. Back to present. The Gilded Fig. As the general manager, Mr. Carlyle, emerged from his upstairs office, his expression went from irritation to stunned surprise. "Mr. Reeves," he exclaimed, rushing forward with a warm handshake. "I wasn't expecting you until next week. I decided to drop in tonight," Keanu said, smiling. Unannounced. Carlyle's eyes darted to Dylan, who looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. The tension was thick. Keanu placed a hand on the reservation book again. "I came to check in on the soul of this place, to see if the dream it was built on is still alive." Carlyle nodded slowly. "And is it?" Keanu didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to Dylan. "Tell me something," Keanu said softly. "Why did you take this job?" Dylan blinked. "What do you mean? Why this restaurant? Why this career?" Dylan looked down. "I guess I thought it would lead to something. I wanted to make something of myself. Grow. Be more than where I came from." Keanu nodded. "That's not a bad reason." He paused. "But never forget that every person who walks in here is hoping for the same thing. A chance to grow. A night to feel seen. A moment to matter, no matter how they look." Dylan's voice caught in his throat. "I understand." "I believe you do," Keanu said, offering a smile. Then, addressing Carlyle, "Let's do something different tonight." Carlyle raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "Let's open the doors," Keanu said, turning to the stunned guests. Just for one night. No dress code. No reservations. Anyone who walks in gets a meal. On the house. A gasp rippled through the restaurant. For real? Asked a woman near the back. Keanu nodded. For real. In memory of my mother. For every person who needed a warm meal and was told they didn't belong. Carlyle hesitated only a moment before breaking into a grin. Let's do it. The staff, shocked but inspired, began preparing immediately. Outside, as word began to spread, through whispers, texts, social media, people began to gather. Not influencers or CEOs, but families, seniors, homeless veterans, students, single parents, servers from other restaurants still in their aprons. The kind of people who rarely got treated to luxury. And that night, the Gilded Fig became something more than a fine dining experience. It became a sanctuary. A night like no other. By 8:15 p.m., the street outside the Gilded Fig had transformed. What was once a quiet stretch of cobblestone tucked between boutiques and private galleries now buzzed with soft excitement. Word had spread, faster than anyone expected. First through murmurs from inside the restaurant, then through a photo posted on social media, showing Keanu Reeves in casual clothes, standing in front of a reservation book with the caption, "He owns it. And tonight, it's free for everyone." People had to read it twice to believe it. It wasn't a publicity stunt. There were no reporters, no red carpet, no camera crews. Just people, from all walks of life, cautiously stepping up to the restaurant's front entrance, unsure if they truly belonged. And they were welcomed. By name, by smile, by hand. Keanu stood at the front door, shaking hands with each new guest, some of them still wearing aprons from their own shifts, others arriving with kids in hand and nervous energy in their steps. "Come in," he said again and again. "Tonight's about you." Inside, the restaurant pulsed with something it had never known before, soul. Gone was the stiff sense of exclusivity that once draped the space like velvet. In its place was laughter, the clink of mismatched glasses borrowed from the staff break room, and the music of stories being told. In a back booth, a janitor sat beside an old man in a wheelchair, both enjoying soup and roasted chicken, their eyes misting as they talked about how long it had been since they'd eaten like this. At the center table, a teenage boy showed his little sister how to use the cloth napkin properly, grinning as if he were in a royal palace. And on the far wall, the single mother from earlier sat with her children, now enjoying fresh desserts, cheesecake and creme brulee, served to them by none other than Keanu himself. A conversation in the kitchen. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the head chef, a stout, no-nonsense man named Ricardo, paced with disbelief. "We're just giving it all away," he muttered, looking at the trays lined up. "Think of it as a different kind of service tonight," said Alina, the hostess, entering with a smile. "One that matters more than any Michelin star." Ricardo grunted. "I've got students from the culinary school volunteering to help. They saw the photo online and ran here in their chef coats." "They'll be glad they came," she said. At that moment, Keanu stepped in. Ricardo straightened. "Sir." Keanu raised a hand. "Call me Keanu." "Are you sure about all this?" Ricardo asked, gesturing to the chaos of free meals and open doors. "We're breaking all the rules tonight." Keanu smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Yeah, but maybe it's time we did." Dylan's reckoning. Back on the floor, Dylan, the waiter who had insulted Keanu just hours earlier, stood frozen in the middle of the room, unsure where he belonged in this new version of the restaurant. He had offered to help, of course, but part of him felt like he didn't deserve to. He watched Keanu from a distance, carrying plates and laughing with children, and for the first time in a long time, Dylan felt something shift inside him. A memory resurfaced, of his own father years ago, coming home late from a shift at a factory. He had grease-stained hands and tired eyes, but every Friday night, he would take Dylan and his sister to the corner diner. They could only afford fries and milkshakes, but his dad always made it feel like fine dining. Dylan's heart twisted. He had forgotten what kindness looked like when it wasn't polished, when it wasn't expected. He had forgotten the warmth of someone making you feel like you belonged, just because you existed. Suddenly, he spotted an elderly woman standing near the entrance, hesitant, holding a faded purse to her chest. Without thinking, Dylan rushed over. "Hi there," he said, voice gentler than before. "Welcome. Can I help you find a table?" The woman blinked in surprise. "Oh, I'm not sure I belong here." Dylan smiled. "That's the best part. Everyone does tonight." He offered his arm. She took it. And just like that, Dylan began to find his place in the story. Keanu's moment of silence. Later that evening, after dozens of guests had been seated and served, Keanu slipped away for a moment. He walked to the back hallway where a quiet painting hung, one no one ever noticed. It was of a fig tree, hand-painted, faded, but delicate. His mother's. He stared at it, his heart full. "I hope you can see this," he whispered. "This place. It's become what you dreamed of. Not a palace for the wealthy, but a sanctuary for the tired, the hungry, the hopeful." A quiet voice interrupted him. "She'd be proud." Keanu turned to find Alina standing nearby. "I know," he said softly, "but I think she'd be prouder of them." He gestured toward the dining room, where guests clapped as a teenage girl performed a violin piece in the corner, where waiters danced between tables serving chocolate mousse with wide grins. "Tonight, everyone's human," Keanu said. "No one's above or beneath anyone." Alina's eyes glistened. "Will we do this again?" Keanu smiled. "Every year, on her birthday." An unexpected visitor. Just when it seemed the night couldn't become more surreal, a knock came at the kitchen side door. Carlyle opened it and was surprised to see a man with a camera crew. "I'm sorry," Carlyle said quickly. "This isn't a media event." The man stepped forward, holding up his hands. "I'm not press. I'm from the Food Angels Foundation. We run a program that feeds the homeless using restaurant leftovers. We heard about what you're doing tonight, and we just wanted to say thank you. It's incredible." Keanu, hearing the conversation, stepped in. "I'm Keanu," he said, extending a hand. "I know," the man chuckled. "You're kind of a legend in our world. Quiet philanthropy, anonymous donations. We've seen your fingerprints." Keanu shrugged, humble as always. "We'd like to partner with the Gilded Fig moving forward," the man said. "Your leftovers could feed hundreds every week." Keanu nodded. "Let's do it. A night's end, a legacy's beginning." By midnight, the guests had begun to leave, each one fuller than they had been hours before, not just in their stomachs, but in their hearts. Outside, a small crowd lingered, thanking the staff, hugging strangers, sharing contact info, and offering to volunteer for future nights. Inside, the staff, now emotionally exhausted, cleaned with a strange kind of joy. They weren't paid extra for this night. There were no tips, no bonuses, but they had been part of something real. As Keanu helped carry out the last tray of dishes, Dylan approached him again. "I'm sorry again," Dylan said, his voice steady this time. "But thank you for not firing me, for showing me how far kindness can go." Keanu looked at him for a long moment. "I don't believe in firing people for mistakes," he said, "only for refusing to learn from them." Dylan nodded. "I want to be better." Keanu smiled. "Then you already are." That night, after everyone had gone and the lights had dimmed, Keanu stood at the corner table, the same one where it all began. He pulled out a chair, sat down, and looked around the room, now filled with echoes of joy and laughter. It wasn't about being a movie star. It wasn't about being the owner. It was about being a human being, one capable of making the world softer, warmer, more just. And that, Keanu knew, was the role he was most proud to play. The ripples of kindness. Long after the final guest had left and the last dish was cleaned, The warmth of that night lingered. The staff of the Gilded Fig returned home with stories they would share over coffee and late-night phone calls. "You wouldn't believe it," they told their friends. "Keanu Reeves turned the restaurant into a free haven for everyone, just because he could." For most of them, it was a moment that would stick in their memories forever, an evening where their work felt less like a job and more like a purpose. The next day, as the restaurant resumed its usual high-end operations, the buzz of the previous night still clung to the walls. Patrons who had heard about what happened began asking questions. Was it true Keanu Reeves was here? Did he really pay for everyone's meals? I heard he personally served dessert to a family of 4. The waitstaff, including Dylan, responded with shy smiles and nods. "Yeah, it's true," they said. "He's different from what you'd expect." But the story didn't stop at the doors of the Gilded Figure. News spread beyond the neighborhood and into the city. Social media posts racked up likes, shares, and comments as people marveled at the sheer humility and generosity of a man who could have spent that evening anywhere else, doing anything else. One post in particular went viral, a simple photo taken by a student volunteer in the kitchen. It showed Keanu, sleeves rolled up, quietly washing dishes while laughing with the staff. The caption read, "We thought we were serving him, but he was serving us the whole time." A letter from a stranger. A few days later, as Keanu sat at his modest home in the hills, a thick envelope arrived in his mail. He opened it to find a handwritten letter from a woman he didn't know. "Dear Mr. Reeves," it began. "I wasn't at the Gilded Fig that night, but my brother was. He's a retired firefighter who's been struggling ever since his accident. That dinner you provided, it was the first time he'd gone out in months. I wanted you to know it wasn't just a meal for him. It was hope. Thank you." Keanu read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and set it aside. It wasn't the only one. Over the next few weeks, he received several similar letters. Thank yous from single mothers, students, veterans, and families who had been touched by the simple act of being welcomed and treated with dignity. He didn't keep the letters as trophies. Instead, he viewed them as reminders, quiet proof that even the smallest gestures, when done with genuine intent, could leave a mark far deeper than expected. Dylan's transformation. Back at the Gilded Fig, Dylan was changing. The night Keanu opened the doors had done more than just shift his perception of the restaurant's purpose. It had shifted his perception of himself. For years, he had approached the job with a certain detachment, viewing customers as transactions and tables as obstacles. He measured his worth by the size of tips and the occasional nod from his manager. But now, Dylan found himself lingering a little longer at tables, taking the time to ask patrons how their day had been. He noticed the small details, when someone looked nervous, when someone seemed unsure of the menu. He caught himself offering extra dessert or a kind word without expecting anything in return. One evening, he stayed late after his shift, cleaning up even though it wasn't required. Alina, the hostess, noticed and smiled. "Something's changed," she said. Dylan shrugged. "I just realized. This isn't just a job. It's a chance to make someone's day better, even if it's just a little." "You sound like him," Alina said quietly. Dylan didn't argue. He didn't mind the comparison. The community's response, the unexpected generosity of that night, sparked something bigger than anyone could have predicted. Local businesses began reaching out to the Gilded Fig, wanting to contribute in their own ways. A nearby bakery donated bread and pastries every morning. A small flower shop offered fresh centerpieces each week, and a neighboring coffee roastery pledged to provide free coffee beans to the staff as a thank you for their efforts. Even the city's food bank took notice. They proposed a monthly partnership. Once a month, the Gilded Fig would host a community night where anyone, regardless of income, could come and enjoy a warm meal, no questions asked. The idea was met with enthusiasm by the staff, and Carlisle, the general manager, couldn't help but grin. "I guess we're not just a restaurant anymore," he said. Keanu, however, stayed out of the spotlight. He quietly approved the partnerships and occasionally dropped by to help, but he never sought credit. He simply watched as the seed he had planted grew into something bigger than himself. A chance encounter. One afternoon, as Keanu walked into the restaurant through the back entrance, he spotted a young boy sitting on the curb outside. The boy, no older than 10, was sketching something on a piece of cardboard with a stubby pencil. His clothes were worn, and his sneakers had seen better days. "Hey there," Keanu said, crouching down. "What are you drawing?" The boy looked up, startled at first, then relaxed when he recognized the man from the photos his mom had shown him online. "It's a tree," the boy said shyly. "A fig tree." Keanu tilted his head. "A fig tree, huh? Why that?" The boy shrugged. "My mom said this place used to be my grandma's favorite. She loved figs. And now we come here sometimes. Mom says it feels like we're remembering grandma together." Keanu's heart clenched. He glanced at the drawing. A rough, charming outline of a tree, its branches reaching toward the edges of the cardboard. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own way. "That's a pretty special drawing," Keanu said. "Mind if I keep it?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." Keanu carefully folded the cardboard, tucked it under his arm, and smiled. "Thanks. I'll keep it somewhere safe." A permanent change. Months passed, and the Gilded Fig continued to grow, not just as a fine dining establishment, but as a place of connection and compassion. While the nightly menu still featured exquisite dishes and carefully paired wines, it was the monthly community nights that truly defined its character. Every first Monday of the month, the restaurant filled with people from all backgrounds. There were no reservations, no dress codes, just open doors, warm meals, and a sense of belonging. Patrons who had been regulars since the beginning now sat beside families experiencing their first fine dining experience. Laughter filled the air, and every story shared at the tables wove another thread into the restaurant's rich tapestry. Keanu, true to form, kept a low profile. He quietly watched from the kitchen or slipped into the dining room to help clear tables and chat with guests. He didn't need a spotlight. He found joy in simply witnessing what the restaurant had become. One night, as he stood in the kitchen, gazing at the fig tree painting, Ricardo walked up beside him. "You know," Ricardo said, crossing his arms, "when you first told me about this whole free meal idea, I thought you were out of your mind." Keanu chuckled. "You weren't wrong, but I was wrong too," Ricardo admitted. "I thought it wouldn't last, that people would just take advantage of it. But they didn't. They came, they ate, and they left better than they came." Keanu nodded. "Sometimes all people need is a chance." Ricardo looked at him, then at the painting. "You've done more than just honor your mother's dream. You've created a legacy." Keanu didn't respond. He just smiled, a soft, humble smile that said more than words ever could. "The bonds we build." It had been over 6 months since that fateful night at the Gilded Figure, 6 months since Keanu had quietly opened the restaurant's doors to anyone and everyone, sparking a transformation no one could have predicted. The once exclusive eatery was now more than just a dining destination. It was a hub of connection. For many, it had become a place of comfort, a small sanctuary in an often cold world. Even as the restaurant returned to its regular, high-end operations on most evenings, the spirit of that night lingered. The staff noticed it, the regular patrons noticed it, and most importantly, the new guests who began trickling in, some shy, some hopeful, felt it the moment they walked through the door. A new role for Dylan. Dylan, who had once been the waiter that dismissed Keanu as a nobody, had changed in ways that even he hadn't expected. After that night, he found himself looking forward to the monthly community events. Instead of viewing them as just another shift, he saw them as opportunities to give something back. He started volunteering his time outside of work, helping at a nearby shelter, and even mentoring a few young people who wanted to enter the restaurant industry. It's funny, Dylan admitted one night to Alina, who had become a close friend. Before, I thought this job was just a stepping stone to something bigger. Now I realize I can actually make an impact right here. Alina smiled, wiping down the host's stand. I think a certain someone had a lot to do with that. Dylan laughed. Yeah. Keanu's got a way of making you rethink things. The artist returns. One quiet afternoon, when the restaurant was closed for prep work, Keanu arrived with a small, unassuming package. He placed it carefully on the bar and called for Ricardo and Carlisle to join him. I've been thinking about that drawing, Keanu said, referring to the little boy's sketch of the fig tree. You mean the one on the cardboard? Ricardo asked. It's still in the office. I didn't know what you wanted us to do with it. Keanu smiled. I wanted to make it permanent. He opened the package to reveal a beautiful framed version of the drawing. The boy's original pencil lines had been preserved, but an artist had gently enhanced it, turning it into a vibrant, colorful piece that captured the heart of the restaurant. I'd like this to hang in the main dining room, Keanu said. It's a reminder of why we're here. A reminder that every person who walks through these doors deserves to feel valued. Carlisle nodded, visibly moved. It's perfect. Within days, the drawing was proudly displayed on the main wall, a piece of simple yet profound art that everyone noticed, and that everyone asked about. It's the heart of this place, Keanu would say whenever someone inquired. And it was. A community partnership. One evening, after a particularly successful community night, Keanu was approached by a young woman named Sarah. She worked for a local nonprofit that provided job training for underprivileged youth. She had heard about the restaurant's monthly events and wanted to collaborate. We have so many young people who are eager to learn skills. Cooking, serving, even management, Sarah explained. We thought maybe the Gilded Fig could be part of their journey. Keanu didn't hesitate. Absolutely. And so began a new chapter for the restaurant. Every month, a group of young trainees would come in, shadowing the chefs, servers, and even Carlisle himself. They learned not just the mechanics of running a restaurant, but the values that made the Gilded Fig special: kindness, respect, and the importance of connection. Some of those trainees went on to secure full-time positions at the restaurant. Others found jobs elsewhere in the industry. But all of them left with more confidence and a renewed sense of hope. A voice from the past. One day, while Keanu was quietly helping in the kitchen, Ricardo handed him a small note. This came in the mail today, he said. Thought you'd want to see it. Keanu unfolded the note and began to read. Dear Keanu, I don't know if you remember me, but I'd worked at the Gilded Fig for a short time when it first opened. Back then, I was struggling. I was angry, lost, and convinced that no one cared. You probably don't even know it, but one night, you said something that stayed with me. You said, everyone deserves a place where they feel seen. I didn't believe it at the time. But now, after everything I've gone through, I understand what you meant. I'm in a better place now, healthier, happier, and it's because of what you built here. Thank you. Keanu read the note twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. He didn't need to tell anyone about it. The fact that someone had taken the time to write those words was enough. The bonds we built. As the months rolled on, the Gilded Fig became a place that felt less like a restaurant and more like a family gathering. People who had once come in as strangers now greeted each other by name. Former trainees returned to visit, bringing their families to show them where their journey had started. Guests who had dined during that original free night often returned, not for the free meals. Those had only happened that one evening, but for the warmth and genuine connection that couldn't be found anywhere else. And through it all, Keanu remained his unassuming self. He didn't make speeches. He didn't pose for cameras. He just showed up, sometimes to cook, sometimes to clean, always to connect. A foundation of hope. It was nearing the one-year anniversary of the first community night at the Gilded Figure. The restaurant had become a local landmark, not because of its celebrity connection, but because of the stories that filled its walls. Every table seemed to hold a memory, every chair a person who had once needed a place to belong. Keanu himself had kept a low profile. To him, the success of the Gilded Fig was never about his name or fame. It was about the small moments of humanity that unfolded each day. But even he couldn't help feeling a quiet pride in what the restaurant had become. Dylan's new mission. Dylan, the waiter whose initial mistake had started it all, was no longer just a server. He had taken on a new role within the restaurant, helping to oversee the monthly community nights and coordinating with local nonprofits to ensure they ran smoothly. He was even mentoring new hires, sharing the lessons he had learned over the past year. One day, during a rare lull before the dinner rush, Dylan found himself standing in front of the framed fig tree drawing. He studied the lines and colors, feeling a weight in his chest that he couldn't quite explain. Keanu happened to walk in just then, carrying a tray of fresh bread from the bakery. "You okay?" Keanu asked, setting the tray on the counter. Dylan turned, hesitating before answering. "I was just thinking about who I used to be before all this. I used to be so closed off, judgmental. I didn't care about anyone beyond my own little world." Keanu leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his expression thoughtful. "What changed?" Dylan gestured to the restaurant around them. "This. You. That first community night. I started seeing people differently. And I guess I started seeing myself differently too. I don't want to go back to who I was." Keanu nodded slowly. "You won't. Not as long as you keep looking forward." The return of Sarah's trainees. Sarah, the nonprofit leader who had introduced the job training partnership, arrived that evening with 3 young adults in tow. These weren't the eager trainees from months before. They were graduates of the program, now working full-time in restaurants, catering companies, and even their own small businesses. Sarah spotted Keanu near the host stand and made her way over. "We just wanted to stop by and say thank you," she said. "Without the Gilded Fig, I'm not sure they'd be where they are today." One of the graduates, a young woman named Rachel, stepped forward and extended her hand. "I wanted to thank you personally. This place gave me my first shot. I learned more here in a few months than I ever thought possible." Keanu shook her hand warmly. "You earned every bit of it. We just gave you a starting line." Rachel smiled, her confidence radiating. "Well, I'm running now." Keanu's quiet grin said it all. That's what it's all about. The guests who stayed. Not everyone who had been touched by the Gilded Fig's generosity left after their first meal. Some became regulars, their lives woven into the fabric of the restaurant. Take Mr. Ramirez, the elderly man in a wheelchair who had attended that initial free night. He now came in every Thursday, always sitting at the same corner table. The staff greeted him by name, and he always left a small envelope marked "Thank you" with a handwritten note inside. It wasn't until later that they realized he had been quietly collecting donations from his senior center and contributing them to the restaurant's community nights. There was also Tanya, a young single mother who had walked into the Gilded Fig on a whim after hearing about the free meals. She had been struggling to provide for her 3 children, but that evening of kindness had given her the push she needed. She'd since found steady work and often returned with her kids to show them how far they'd come. One day, she even offered to volunteer during the monthly community nights, saying, "I want to give back to the place that gave us hope." A reflection in the kitchen. Late one night, after the restaurant had closed and the staff had gone home, Keanu lingered in the kitchen. The space was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. He stood in front of the painting of the fig tree, his mother's dream, now realized in ways she'd never imagined. He thought about the people who had walked through these doors over the past year, the single parents, the students, the veterans, the families just trying to hold it all together. He thought about how a simple idea, a free meal, a welcoming space, had blossomed into something far greater than he could have anticipated. And he thought about his mother, Patricia, the woman who had dreamed of a place where anyone could feel like they belonged. If she could see the Gilded Fig now, What would she say? She'd be proud, a voice said softly behind him. Keanu turned to see Carlyle, the general manager, standing in the doorway. She'd be so proud, Carlyle repeated. And I think you know that. Keanu smiled, his eyes glistening in the dim light. It's not about me. It's about all of us. The staff, the guests, the community. This place exists because of them. And because of you, Carlyle added. Keanu said nothing, simply nodding in quiet acknowledgement. A legacy of light. A year and a half after the night that transformed the Gilded Fig, the restaurant was busier than ever, but not in the way it once had been. The clientele now came from all walks of life, drawn not just by the reputation of the food, but by the spirit of the place. The monthly community nights had grown into an institution, anticipated by locals who knew that the first Monday of every month wasn't just a night for a free meal. It was a celebration of humanity. Chefs, servers, guests, volunteers, everyone came together to create something more than dinner. A ceremony of gratitude. As the 2-year anniversary approached, the staff decided they wanted to surprise Keanu with something special. They organized a small private ceremony to recognize his quiet contributions. Carlyle gathered everyone in the main dining room one evening after closing. The tables were cleared, the lights dimmed, and the framed fig tree drawing stood prominently on an easel at the center of the room. Keanu arrived, unprepared for the gathering, wearing his usual simple attire, dark jeans, and a black shirt. "What's all this?" he asked, looking around at the smiling faces of the staff and volunteers. "It's for you," Alina said, stepping forward with a piece of paper in hand. "But really, it's for all of us." She began to read. 2 years ago, this place was just a restaurant. A beautiful one, sure, but it was built on the idea of exclusivity, on keeping people out. And then one night, everything changed. You opened the doors, and in doing so, you opened our eyes. You showed us that kindness doesn't have to be complicated, that even in a world of fancy meals and expensive wines, the most valuable thing we can offer is a sense of belonging. Today, we're not just a restaurant. We're a community, a family. And that's because of you. Thank you for giving us this gift. Keanu stood there, visibly moved, as the staff broke into applause. He raised his hand to quiet them, his voice steady but emotional. "It was never about me," he said simply. "It was about what we could do together." The fig tree grows. What began as a local phenomenon soon started to inspire others. In a nearby city, a group of independent restaurant owners decided to follow the Gilded Fig's example, hosting their own community nights once a month. A local food writer penned an article titled "How One Night of Kindness Changed a Restaurant and a City," which gained national attention. Soon, chefs from across the country began reaching out, asking how they could start similar programs. Keanu, always modest, made it clear that this wasn't a movement with his name attached. "It's just about people helping people," he told one reporter. "If we all do a little, it adds up to a lot." Reuniting with the past. One quiet evening, after the dinner rush had passed and the restaurant was winding down, Keanu sat at his usual corner table. He was joined by Dylan, now a senior manager at the restaurant, and Alina, who had become one of the restaurant's key coordinators for community events. As they talked about the upcoming anniversary, a woman approached the table hesitantly. She looked to be in her mid-40s, her hair streaked with gray and her eyes bright but cautious. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I just wanted to say thank you." Keanu looked up, smiling gently. "What for?" The woman hesitated, then continued. "My father came here on that first free night. He was sick, cancer, but he didn't tell anyone. He said that meal, it made him feel like himself again. Like he wasn't just a patient. You didn't know it at the time, but you gave him one of his happiest evenings before he passed." Keanu's expression shifted, his smile softening into something more serious. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said sincerely. "I'm glad he felt that way here." The woman nodded. "You should know that what you're doing, It reaches farther than you think. A final gift. As the anniversary drew near, Keanu felt a growing sense of gratitude. He decided to quietly fund a scholarship in his mother's name for local culinary students who couldn't afford tuition. He didn't announce it, didn't hold a press conference. He simply sent a letter to the local culinary school, explaining that the Patricia Reeves Memorial Scholarship would cover the full tuition for one deserving student each year. On the night of the 2-year celebration, the staff surprised Keanu by inviting the first scholarship recipient, a young woman named Alina, to the restaurant. "Thank you," Alina said, her voice trembling. "This scholarship means I can keep going. I can finish what I started. It means everything." Keanu smiled and replied, "It's just the beginning." The heart of the fig tree. By the end of the evening, the restaurant was buzzing with warmth and laughter. The staff and guests toasted to the community they had built together. It wasn't just about food. It wasn't about celebrity. It was about connection, humanity, and the belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could create something lasting. As Keanu stood by the door, shaking hands and thanking guests, he glanced at the framed fig tree drawing on the wall. He thought about his mother's dream, a place where everyone could feel they belonged. It had taken time, effort, and more than a little faith, but that dream was now a reality. The Gilded Fig wasn't just a restaurant. It was a living legacy.